Welcome back to the Bright July podcast, brought to you by Luxy Health and proudly sponsored by Zeiss and EssilorLuxottica. This is part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Gareth Lingham from the Lion's Eye Institute. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, go back and start there. Now let's continue. So if you could change one thing about how myopia is communicated to parents by clinicians or by schools and governments, what would that be?
I think clinicians are doing a fantastic job of communicating myopia to parents. One thing I would change about the way we as a society probably view myopia is it's more than just a short-term inconvenience. And so a lot of people I talk to, yes, it means that they need glasses. Yes, if they're to get laser refractive surgery once they're an adult, then they would not need the glasses. But the really important thing that we're trying to address here is that myopia is caused by an increased growth of your eye. So if you become myopic, your eye is longer than it would have otherwise been, and particularly if you have high amounts of myopia, it's very long. And so that leads to an increased risk of vision loss. And this is not vision loss in childhood, it's typically much later in life, typically after age 50. And even if you get laser refractive surgery, that's not going to reverse that risk, right? So by trying to prevent myopia onset in childhood by getting it outdoors or even trying to slow the rate at which it gets worse with specific treatments, we're really trying to address that risk of vision loss that's going to occur in 50 years or 30, 40 years and improve their eye health that way. There's lots of other benefits to preventing myopia in the first place, which come from things like the short-term inconvenience, so preventing the need to wear glasses, making it easy to get laser refractive surgery. That also comes from preventing myopia onset or preventing the rate at which it gets worse. But that long-term risk of vision loss is really a really important part of the picture. It's kind of abstract. It's hard to communicate, but it's a really important aspect to myopia management.
Actually, just on a professional level, when you do sort of get around to colleagues and talk on that point, if people do push back on that aspect, I guess more specifically, myopia being a disease process in itself, what are the comments that you kind of hear from, people in the professions that may have some sort of issue with that?
Yeah, I think the view of myopia in the profession has changed a lot in the last 10 to 20 years, and that's driven by my colleagues and senior researchers who have been working in this field for a long time, often with less interest than there is now in myopia, and have really been pushing this this message. So I actually don't hear that very often now from eye care professionals. I think most people accept that myopia has important long-term implications for risk of vision loss. It's not just about needing glasses. Mm-hmm. And so I think that message has sunk in, and it's just something we need to further communicate to the public. When I talk about this risk of vision loss, I also try not to scare parents, I suppose. This is an increased risk. It's maybe threefold. It can be up to 20-fold depending on the severity. But when we talk about absolute risk of vision loss, we're talking maybe instead of one person in 200 developing vision loss in their lifetime, we're talking about 3 people in 200 developing vision loss in their lifetime. So it's a mildly increased risk, but when we think about how many people have short-sightedness, it actually accounts for quite a lot of vision loss in Australia.
Yeah. So someone who's spent so many years studying this area, what does outdoor time look like for you in your own personal life? And what would you say to parents who wish they could get their kids outside more and struggling to make that happen consistently?
So for me, it's probably changed a lot over time. I was lucky enough to grow up on a farm, so it was very easy to go outside, and there was lots of activities and space to do so. I now live in an apartment with a balcony, and so that's my one sort of local outdoor area. So for me, it's more about incidental outdoor time. So my daily commute to work, if I can be outside, riding my bike or things like that. That's a good way for me to get outside. If I can find some time at lunchtime to go for a walk, or that's the sort of way in which I go outside. Nowadays, walk to the shops, and those sorts of activities. So I think it's really can be really hard depending on the spaces you have available to you for safe outdoor time, and that's something that we need to continue to think about addressing in the way we design our cities and our apartments and our houses to enable kids to be outside in a safe way, and families too.
Yeah, and I think that's something that as Australians, we take it for granted. Our climate is actually very conducive to outdoor time. I speak to colleagues, say in Singapore, very humid. So there's that sort of barrier, the mental barrier of going outside and spending 2 hours outside. But in Australia, we're very lucky and very fortunate that most parts of the country you can do it quite comfortably. And think about some of the winters in, say, the US or Europe, bitter cold, blizzards, snowstorms. We're at winter now, and I've got a light long sleeve shirt on, and that's all I need to go outside. So yeah, we should take advantage of that and sort of embrace it, and it's a gift, really.
Yeah, I agree with you. Mindset's important when it comes to this. I was lucky enough to live in Ireland, in Dublin, for a couple of years there, and of course it's cold most of the year round, even in summer. But I can't explain it, but I suppose there was no good days to go outside, so it meant you just went outside whenever you could. And you just made sure that you dressed for the cold and you dressed for the wet, because it would rain without notice. But I think having that mindset of, even if it's cold, even if it's wet, you can dress appropriately for that weather and still go outside and be quite comfortable. Humidity is harder to deal with, but I was talking to some families in Singapore, and the coldest part of the day is early in the morning, and of course they have high UV there as well. So actually going outside, or saying, this is the best time of the day to be outside, is early in the morning before that UV index goes up, and it makes the temperature more bearable. That had some positive feedback, but I don't know if anyone actually changed their behaviour because of that.
Yeah, and I love this one that I always think about. We've got that saying in Norway: "There's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing." And I always that's something that we can learn off. Just get a jacket on, put your boots on, whatever you need to do, scarf, beanie, get out and spend some time outdoors. Great. Okay. So we're just now at the point now where wearable technology can actually measure the light a child is exposed to throughout the day, rather than just relying on parent recall. So how do you think objective light measurements can change the way we practice clinically, and also in your research?
So I'll talk about this mostly from a research perspective. It's important because parents particularly have a lot of questions about things like, how much time outside should I be spending? How much time on screens is too much? What's the best way? What sort of thresholds should be aiming for to make sure my child has the best eye health for their future? And so those questions are quite hard to answer based on questionnaires alone, because it's hard to remember what you've done today, let alone yesterday, let alone a month ago. And so wearables are really helpful in terms of accurately measuring those sorts of variables, things like outdoor time, things like how much time you're on doing close-up work. Now, there's a whole host of challenges that still come with wearables. There's a lot of data to sift through and to analyze, and doing some work at the moment as well, trying to sort of classify what is outdoor, what's an outdoor area. This comes back to the discussion we had earlier about, if you sit by a bright window, is that outside enough? Or if you're in a partially covered shelter, is that bright enough? These are the sorts of questions we can actually look at addressing through wearables. And so we're going to be able to further advance the research into myopia and how we can best prevent that through our behaviours with the help of wearable technologies.
You've actually taken a different approach to measure outdoor time as well in your research. You've actually looked at UV exposure to the eye. That's another way that you guys have used to help evaluate that.
Yeah. So sunlight obviously has effects on our skin and our eyes, and you can measure sun damage or early signs of sun damage to the eye. And if you've been outside in the sun more, you'll tend to have more sun damage. So they do correlate. And if you will, they don't always match up exactly. If you wore sunglasses the entire time you're outside, you probably won't have much sun damage. But we do see this correlation between eye damage. You can measure skin damage. You can actually look at vitamin D too. So vitamin D is produced in response to sunlight exposure to your skin. So there's a few things we've tried to take advantage of that help us to try and more accurately measure outdoor time, because questionnaires can be subject to what we call recall bias, which essentially just means that it's hard to remember what you did. And some of the wearables have really only come around the last few years. So that's probably where things are moving now.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, thanks, Gareth. Thanks for coming on to the podcast and sharing your expertise and insights. And hopefully families around Australia can get a lot of value out of that.
My pleasure. Thank you, John.
That's it for part 2 with Dr. Gareth Lingham. Thanks again to Gareth for his time and expertise. Bright July runs through to August 2nd. Get outside, get your kids outside, and make it count. Brought to you by Luxy Health, sponsored by Zeiss and Essilor Luxottica. Until next time.